I never thought a simple business trip could turn into a nightmare I'd never escape. The moment I stepped into that hotel lobby, something felt wrong. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, drop a like, and leave a comment. Udanti. Want to miss the shocking ending? It's something that will haunt you long after the story ends. I was traveling alone for work, a week-long conference in a city I barely knew. I had booked a room at what I thought was a charming old hotel downtown. The reviews mentioned its historic charm and quaint, vintage feel. Looking back, the words quaint and charm now seem almost sinister in hindsight. From the moment I walked through the doors, the lobby had a strange stillness to it, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The air smelled faintly of mildew and wax polish, a combination that immediately made the hair on my neck stand up. The front desk clerk was a thin man with a pallid complexion, who greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome to the Blackwood Hotel," he said, his voice soft, almost too soft. I gave him my ID and credit card, and as he processed my check-in, I noticed something odd. The entire lobby was unnervingly quiet. There were no other guests in sight, no chatter, no footsteps. Just the faint hum of a single ceiling fan. "Your room is on the 5th floor, he said, sliding me the key. "Room 512. Elevators to your left. Enjoy your stay." I took the elevator, noticing the faint, almost imperceptible creak of the doors as they closed. The ride was silent, except for the occasional mechanical whine and a strange, cold draft that seemed to seep in around the edges of the elevator doors. I chalked it up to an old building. But when the elevator stopped on the 5th floor and the doors slid open, I found myself staring down a long, dimly lit corridor. The carpet was patterned in dark reds and blues, and the wallpaper was faded and peeling in places. The lights flickered intermittently, casting brief shadows that seemed to move just at the edge of my vision. Room 512 was at the far end of the hall. As I approached, I noticed that the hallway seemed to stretch slightly longer than I remembered walking, though I'd counted steps in my head. Maybe it was just my imagination, I thought. The door to my room was old, solid wood, and as I inserted the keycard, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. The lock clicked, and the door swung open slowly, revealing a room that was dark and quiet. Inside, the room was surprisingly large, with a high ceiling and heavy curtains drawn over the window. The air smelled faintly of dust and old furniture. I placed my suitcase on the floor and turned to turn on the lights, but the switch flickered, and only half the lamps illuminated. Shadows danced across the room in a way that made the corners seem impossibly deep, almost swallowing the edges of the space. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just a hotel with character. I unpacked my things and settled into the bed, trying to focus on the work I needed to do. But as I lay there, I couldn't ignore the subtle noisy creak of the floorboards outside my door, the distant hum of something I couldn't quite identify. It was as if the building was alive, breathing softly around me. Around midnight, I woke to a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a faint scratching, coming from somewhere near the window. I sat up, heart racing, and listened. The sound stopped as soon as I became aware of it. I told myself it was just the wind, maybe a branch scraping against the glass. I pulled the curtains aside and looked out, but the street below was empty, deserted. The scratching started again, this time at the door. Slow, deliberate, almost measured. I held my breath, straining to hear. It stopped. Then came a soft whisper, almost a sig so faint I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. My phone's clock blinked 12:47 a.m. I told myself to calm down, that old hotels make weird noises, but the feeling of being watched refused to leave me. I got up, walked to the door, and checked the hallway. Empty. Silent. No footsteps. No shadows. Just the dim corridor stretching on forever. Unchanged. I returned to the room and tried to focus on the conference presentation I had to prepare. But the sense of unease grew heavier. Then came the knocking. Slow. Deliberate. Not at the door this time, but from inside the room. From the closet. My stomach dropped. I had checked the closet earlier, it was empty. My rational mind screamed it was impossible, but my body froze. The knocking continued, rhythmic, deliberate, like a heartbeat echoing in the dark. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and pointed it at the closet. The beam illuminated nothing but the coats and hangers inside. I exhaled slowly, trying to convince myself it was just the building settling. But then I saw a faint outline of a handprint on the inside of the closet door, smudged into the wood, as if someone had pressed against it recently. I hadn't touched it. Panic began to rise. I considered calling the front desk, but my phone had no signal. The Wi-Fi was down. I felt trapped. I paced the room, trying to rationalize. Maybe it was a prank by hotel staff. Maybe someone had broken in. But the thought of someone being in the room with me, unseen, sent shivers down my spine. I checked under the bed. Nothing. I checked the bathroom. Empty. I returned to the bed, heart pounding. That's when I noticed it's the reflection in the mirror. At first, I saw only myself, tense and pale. Then, just behind my shoulder, a shadow, flickering, quick, almost imperceptible. I spun around. Empty room. I tried to sleep, pulling the covers over my head, but the sound persisted, the scratching, the whispering, the rhythmic tapping from the closet. Hours passed, though it felt like an eternity. By the time morning arrived, I was exhausted, terrified, but alive. I told myself I was imagining things, that the old hotel had simply played tricks on my mind. But the events of that first night were only the beginning. Something about that place was off, and it wasn't going to let me leave unscathed. The second night at the Blackwood Hotel was worse than the first. I tried to convince myself that my fear the previous night had been paranoia, that old buildings simply creak and settle, that the shadows I saw were products of exhaustion. But as night fell and the darkness of my room swallowed everything, I knew that something wasn't right. I tried to distract myself by reviewing my conference materials on my laptop, but the moment the lights dimmed from the setting sun, I felt it the same oppressive presence that had been in the room before. It wasn't just a feeling, it was as if the very air had grown heavier, pressing down on my chest. Every sound became magnified. The hum of the air conditioner, the subtle shifting of the old radiator, the faint footsteps that seemed to come from the hallway outside my door. Around 11 p.m., I heard it again, the scratching. This time, it wasn't just from the closet. It came from the walls themselves, the thin old plaster vibrating under some unseen force. I froze, listening. A whisper followed, low and garbled, almost like words, but not quite. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure anyone nearby could hear it. I turned on all the lamps, and yet the corners of the room remained dark, as if the light itself feared to enter. I grabbed my phone to call the front desk, but the screen displayed no service. The Wi-Fi was still down. Panic started to rise, a hot, suffocating wave. I considered leaving the room, running down the hall to the lobby, but something stopped me. It was a sense that stepping into the corridor would be worse than staying. The hallway wasn't empty last night. No, I remembered now. There were faint figures, shadows that moved just beyond the reach of the lights, and their presence was almost waiting. I spent hours sitting on the edge of the bed, listening, trying to convince myself that it was a nightmare in progress rather than reality. But then the knocking began again. Soft at first, like a timid tap, then more insistent, coming from the wall behind the headboard. I leaped back, almost falling off the bed. It wasn't the closet this time. It was inside the wall itself. I pressed my ear to it, straining. A voice came, whispering clearly now, though the words were foreign, unintelligible. And then, just as suddenly, silence. My breathing was shallow, every nerve in my body taut with fear. I wanted to leave, to get out, but every instinct told me that moving would provoke something I couldn't understand. Hours passed, and sleep never came. The darkness was alive with tiny movements, subtle and fleeting shadows that weren't my own, whispers that seemed to come from the ceiling, the floor, even the very walls themselves. The hotel had become a labyrinth, and I was trapped inside its pulse, its heartbeat. Around 3 a.m., I heard a thud from the hallway, soft but deliberate. My door rattled slightly, as if something heavy was leaning against it. I froze. Then the whispers began again, this time louder, overlapping, almost urgent. I couldn't tell if they were coming from one source or many. It felt like the building was speaking to me, telling me something I wasn't meant to hear. Summoning every ounce of courage, I opened the door. The hallway was dark, silent, stretching longer than I remembered. I stepped out slowly, flashlight in hand. The beam revealed nothing unusual at first, just the dim carpet and peeling wallpaper. But then I saw it. A shadow at the far end of the hall. Tall, thin, almost human in shape, but its movements were wrong, jerky, unnatural. Like it was not bound by the rules of our world. I froze. It seemed to notice me, tilting its head as if considering whether I belonged in this place. And then, without warning, it vanished. My rational mind screamed that I was hallucinating, sleep-deprived, imagining things. Yet the air was colder now, and the hallway seemed impossibly long, impossibly silent. I stepped forward, hesitant, every nerve alert. I reached the end of the hall. Nothing. No shadow, no figure, just darkness. The door to the stairwell was closed, though I remembered leaving it ajar. Returning to my room, I noticed that the closet door was slightly open, though I had closed it before leaving. My hands shook as I approached. Flashlight pointed directly at the interior. Nothing. Just the same coats, the same hangers, the same shadows that seemed to cling to the corners. I slammed it shut, heart hammering. That night stretched endlessly. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like someone pacing just outside my door. Every gust of wind rattling the window sounded like a whisper calling my name. Sleep was impossible. I tried counting minutes instead of hours, but the presence in the room felt infinite, eternal, as if it had existed long before I had arrived and would continue long after I left. I couldn't eat. I barely drank water. Every sound, every movement seemed magnified in that room. It was as if the hotel was alive, its walls breathing, its shadows watching, and the whispers they grew more coherent, almost understandable, yet still beyond reason. At some point I became aware of a smell, faint, metallic, like iron. I traced it to the corner of the room, near the window. The curtains had moved slightly, though I was certain I had left them still. The smell intensified as I approached, and I realized with a shock that it wasn't just metal, it was blood. Not fresh, not wet, but dry, crusted along the edge of the windowsill, smeared in an unnatural pattern. I staggered back, heart racing, and the room plunged into a sudden, oppressive silence. The air felt thicker now, almost suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, and then a final sound, the whisper, louder than ever, directly behind me. My name, my actual name, spoken clearly. He spooned around. The room was empty, but for the first time, I noticed something I had overlooked. The mirror across from the bed, my reflection was there, pale, tense, terrified. But behind me, in the reflection, was something else. A figure, tall, shadowy, indistinct, but unmistakably standing behind me, just beyond the edge of the bed. I turned quickly. Nothing. My flashlight beam cut through the room. Empty. I spent the rest of the night in the corner of the room, back pressed against the wall, flashlight clutched in my trembling hands. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow seemed to move independently. By the time dawn arrived, I was a wreck, trembling, convinced I had lost some fragment of my mind. And yet, as I left the room in the pale morning light, there was no sign of the scratches, no whispering, no blood. The room looked as normal as any hotel room should. The presence had vanished, or had it just retreated, waiting for the next night. The third night at the Blackwood Hotel was something I can never fully describe, because no words seem adequate for the terror I faced. BIT's point, exhaustion had taken over my body, but my mind remained painfully alert, trapped in a state of hype. Every sound, every shadow, every creak and whisper seemed amplified. I felt like a hunted animal in a place that wasn't entirely of this world. I tried to ignore the noises, telling myself that sleep deprivation and stress were creating hallucinations. But when I heard the scratching begin again, I knew this was no trick of the mind. This was something else. Slow, deliberate, measured. Not from the closet this time. Not from the walls, but from the ceiling. Above me. I stared upward, flashlight in hand, trying to pierce the darkness. Nothing. Just the ceiling, cracked and aged. And then, from above, came a whisper so low it seemed to vibrate through my bones. Leave. My hand shook as I grabbed my laptop, intending to stay awake as long as possible. But every time I opened it, the screen flickered violently, the words on my slides warping, twisting into shapes I could barely comprehend. And then the whispers returned, this time forming clear phrases, repeating over and over. You don't belong. You can't leave. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed air. I needed to escape. I grabbed my coat and stepped into the hall. The moment I did, the corridor seemed impossibly long, stretching further than before. The lights flickered violently, and the shadows along the walls moved independently, growing taller, darker, menacing. I walked slowly, every step echoing unnaturally. Then I saw them. Shadows converging at the end of the hall. Figures, indistinct but humanoid, moving as if they were alive, yet unreal, waiting, watching. Fear rooted me to the spot. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The figures began to shift, morphing, their shapes writhing as if underwater, edges flickering like static on a broken television. He felt a cold, invisible hand brush against my arm, and a whisper right in my ear. You shouldn't be here. I ran. The corridor seemed to bend, twist, never end. Doors appeared on either side, opening and closing with no logic. I stumbled into one, hoping for a stairwell, an exit. Anything but the room was empty, save for a large mirror. And in that mirror, I saw not only my reflection, but the countless figures behind me, crowded, pressing, their shadows merging into one massive, dark mass. I spun around nothing. The room was empty, but when I looked back at the mirror, the mass had moved closer, stretching, reaching, and then the whisper came again, louder, more urgent. You can't leave. You never will. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear. Time seemed meaningless. Finally, I turned and ran through the next door, blindly, feeling the cold air and the sense of being pursued, as if the building itself were alive, intent on keeping me trapped. I found myself back in my room 512. Everything was exactly as it had been, eerily normal, as though nothing had happened. The closet door was closed, the bed neatly made, but then I noticed something on the floor near the bed. Footprints, barefoot, not mine. They led from the door to the closet and back again. I felt my blood run cold. I wanted to leave, to check out immediately, but something held me back. That same feeling from the first night, oppressive, ancient presence that seemed to fill every corner of the room. And then I saw it. A shadow, low and creeping, slithering along the floor toward me. It moved impossibly fast, yet silently, like liquid darkness. I stumbled backward, tripping over my suitcase. The shadow followed, advancing across the room with deliberate intent. I screamed, but no sound came out. My voice was trapped in my throat, and then, as suddenly as it appeared, the shadow retreated, sliding under the bed, leaving the room in a suffocating silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Dawn came, and with it, a fragile relief. The hotel lobby looked normal. The clerk smiled, friendly as ever, though I swore his eyes flickered with something unhuman. I packed my things quickly, checked out, and left, vowing never to return. But the memory followed me, the sensation of being watched, of not being alone, lingering long after I left the city. Even now, I can't explain what happened. I don't know if it was a ghost, a poltergeist, or something else entirely. But I know this. The Blackwood Hotel isn't just old, it's alive, and it's hungry for those who wander its halls alone. And here's the terrifying part. I wasn't the only one. Later, I discovered online forums filled with stories of the hotel guests, reporting similar experiences, strange shadows, whispers, footprints that appeared out of nowhere, and feelings of being trapped. Some people never returned. Others left changed, haunted for years. I can only hope I'm not one of the unlucky ones. So, if you ever find yourself booking a room at an old, charming hotel, think twice. Pay attention to your instincts, and if something feels off, leave. Don't wait. Because some places will never let you go. Before you go, make sure to subscribe. Hit that notification bell, and leave a like if this story gave you chills. Comment below with your thoughts, F. You ever had a terrifying experience in a hotel? Or do you think this was just a story? Share it, because the more we talk about these things, the more real they become. And remember, the Blackwood Hotel might be closer than you think.